Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Really appreciate it.
very welcome. Nice to be here, and yeah, glad to help.
Sweet. So, do you want to just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, maybe how you got into filmmaking?
Yeah. So I grew up in Nottingham, in England, in the Midlands, and I mean, from a very very young age, I guess, sort of 3, 4, I was very obsessed with cameras, and lots of stories of my parents were telling me, like, as I got older, that I was always grabbing the camera and wanting to look through it, without really understanding what I was doing. And I always wanted to see the final pictures. Obviously, back then it was film, so I had to wait a few weeks. And there was lots of I've got Super 8 of me that my dad is filming of me when my mum's taking a photograph of me, and I'm asking my mum, where's the picture, and she's like, you can't see it yet. So that concept of taking an image and wanting to see it was something I think from a young age I was very interested in. And then I sort of, growing up, I'm dyslexic, so school was quite difficult. But I was lucky that my parents were, very in tune with that, and they noticed that with me and my brother, who's an editor, and he's dyslexic too. And I think they gave us a lot of help with our schoolwork, knowing that left to our own devices we would really struggle. So I think that helped us not panic so much as kids, and perhaps gave us the ability to explore other things, because school was difficult, but we were being given support. And therefore they also, I think, really pushed us to explore other activities. So I was, at a young age, got into like drama school, dance school, from about 8, I think 9. And I loved that, because to me it was a way of expressing, a safe place to express yourself and have fun and be creative ultimately. And just use your imagination, because I really didn't enjoy the academic part of school. I like learning, I love listening and learning, but the minute I had to then take those learnings and regurgitate it, that was a real challenge for me. So acting and dance was just, for me, really fulfilling. So I think my parents pushed us and really helped us pursue those things. And I think acting led to a love of film. Growing up, we watched films from a very young age, and we were obsessed with films, and often films that were way older than we perhaps should have been watching. But our parents were quite liberal, and we weren't obviously going to start being violent kids just because we were watching adult films. And I think those films really broadened our minds, so we weren't just watching kids films. I mean, I wasn't into cartoons as a kid, which is really random. Everyone I know loved cartoons. I didn't like cartoons. I liked films, more adult type films, not adult in that way. And I think that path from acting and loving films was I want to make these films, but at a young age didn't really know what that entailed. So I guess that pushed me into, once I got old enough, 15, 16, I sort of had to do work experience, and I got a chance to go to London and work for a couple of weeks in a production company, and that just immediately kind of blew my mind. And I was like, oh, these are people I want to be around. These people, these are creative people. And I hadn't met any people like that before, really. And I just realized there was a whole industry of people making stuff. So I just pursued that, went to film school, and and sort of got a job as a runner. I don't know how much. Yeah, if you want more detail, then please.
Okay. Yeah. What is dyslexic? You see jumbled up words when you try to read. Is that how it works?
It's different for everybody. Mine, to be honest, is not that severe, and I think I've definitely, as I've gotten older, I've really learned to get out, I don't know, learn how to be better at the things that I was weak at. So for me, reading was always not too bad, although I often used to read the same line over and over. And so reading a book was horrible for me growing up, because I'm halfway through a page, I'd be like, what have I just read? What? I was concentrating so hard on the reading that I didn't take in the content. And I learned that with learning, if I read with music, for example, it was much easier because the music like somehow focused me and allowed me to, it created an extra sense of mood and something, even if it wasn't anything to do with the story, but it just helped me build the pictures in my mind from reading. But it was not an easy thing. So I didn't really read novels until I was way older. And then the hardest thing for me with dyslexia was getting my thoughts on paper. So writing essays in school, for example, was like the hardest thing, because if someone asked me a question, I could really articulately say it and explain my thinking and ideas. But if I had to put that down on paper in a linear fashion, that was really difficult. And obviously that's the hardest part of my job now when you're writing treatments and stuff, you know, is getting your ideas down concisely and you know, clearly for people. When that barrier for me is really quite difficult, but the rest of it, my maths and, you know, reading and all that is pretty good now. So I think the dyslexia, in a way, as I said, just probably really helped because it pushed me into the other direction. You know, I ran away from things that were really academic and had the support at home to enable that. I feel like very recently I've been kind of really thinking about actually how lucky I was, you know, because a lot of people in the creative industries have these learning difficulties, or, you know, we're all right brain dominant, and with the wrong circumstances that can be really, really tough. And I was just really lucky that my parents were open-minded and did the research and learned about it themselves and really pushed and supported us. Without that, I think I would have been in a very different place right now.
Cool. So are you like more visual, like with storyboards, and like you can kind of see images in your head and like make it out that way?
Yeah, I don't have a photographic memory as such. Like I can't draw what I've seen or anything like that. I'm not one of those sort of highly skilled people, but I remember pretty much most of what I see. I remember. So if I go to a street or even seeing a person or a thing that I've seen 10 years ago without any significance, I'll remember it. I'll be like, oh, I saw that person, or I remember this, you know. So my guidance system is terrible, but my visual memory and things that I see is very, very strong. So I'll often, I don't know, I'm very observant. I look around and I see everything in detail, and kind of they do stick. So I'm quite a visually, my brain is definitely visually kind of dominant in that way. So visualizing and imagining what I want something to look like is something that I guess comes fairly naturally, and I really enjoy doing. Storyboarding is like, a really enjoyable process, although I'm a terrible drawer, which is a shame. If I could draw, I've always thought I would be like, you know, I'd have the perfect set of skills because I could just go boom, you know, but I'm a useless drawer.
And so when you grew up, like in London, or did you grow up in England, I guess?
Yeah, in Nottingham in England, so middle England.
And did you grow up around like cars? Did you have a specific interest in cars yourself?
Not cars, weirdly. I was, from a young age, my father had motorbikes and like motorbikes, and he had a really old Triumph thing that he spent 4 years building from scratch, from like bits of rust and, you know, fixing up and building. And I used to go and stand in the shed with him for hours on end on a weekend, and sometimes after school, just watching and helping and like holding things and cleaning them for him while he was. And I was fascinated by the way it went together, but I wasn't really that interested in exactly how it worked. I was more interested in how parts were, you know, shiny, or I love just touching everything, you know, engine parts, cogs, and like cams and whatever it was. I was just really into the mechanics of it, but not really from actually how it worked, although I understood the basic principle. So I think that love of motorbikes and from my dad really washed off on me, and I got into motorbikes. So as soon as I was allowed to ride a motorbike, I got a motorbike, and I learned to ride. And I did learn to drive with my dad, which was a really fun experience from memory, because we just go to a car park and I'd learn the clutch and the gearbox like very, very gradually, from about 13. So I learned to drive early on, but I wasn't as interested in cars as I was motorbikes, because that was what my dad was kind of into. So yeah, I didn't really have this crazy car background that a lot of people that work in the automotive sector of filmmaking tend to have. It was I was, to be honest, more interested in horse riding and acting and things like that. I was the most petrol head kid in a way, except for the motorbikes, which I did like. But I didn't really watch car racing or anything. I didn't have Ferraris on my bedroom wall or anything like that. So yeah, the car thing came much later. In fact, once I started properly working professionally, I just found this niche.
On your website, it says you almost became Anakin Skywalker. Like, what's the?
Yeah, well, that's because of the acting. And I was quite serious. I was in like an amateur theatre group, and I was part of this weird, like, in those days there was not really any internet, so there was like a brochure of kids that you could, you get put into this like catalogue of kid actors in different parts of the country. And when they were doing Star Wars, I think I was 11, which is a bit too old as it turned out, but I looked really young. I was tiny when I was a kid, so I looked about 9 when I was 11. And they were shooting a lot of it at Pinewood, so a lot of it was in England. So they did a casting call out for British kids, and the casting director went through this catalogue and picked me amongst some others. And obviously they did a huge search globally, so it was a tiny chance. But I met the American casting director, and I was like 11, and I had to sit and chat, and they took the photo. And so it was an audition, but didn't have to do anything too difficult. So yeah, there was a very small chance that I was going to get the part, but yeah, that was it really. It didn't go anywhere, and probably a good thing after seeing what happened to that young actor.
Yeah, it's difficult being a child actor, but some like actors have transitioned into being directors. Like, do you think being an actor yourself has helped learn more about the process, and like maybe put yourself in the actor's shoe when you're like discussing how to do a scene or something while you're directing?
Yeah, I mean, I even though I stopped acting at sort of 17, and I was never acting in film, so I didn't have the film set etiquette or the grammar, if you like, that film actors will undoubtedly learn when they start having directors and cameras and learning blocking and all of that. But I certainly had like a really good grounding in how actors prepare, what's important, how you interact with other actors, and also taking direction from a stage director, and just what it is to become a character. And that was what I loved about acting so much, was this idea that you can suddenly become someone else, and once you give up your kind of insecurity, you really dive into a world where you're kind of playing, and you can do anything you want. And at the core of it is really empathy, because by being someone else, you understand their problems that aren't yours, and you come away, I think, with a sort of more compassionate or empathetic sensibility, because you've been that other person, or you've been in a situation which is really traumatizing or really crazy, whatever, because you've had to play it. And I think coming into my work, and I started directing, the minute I was working with actors, I suddenly, I don't know, I just felt this really emotional connection to them, even if it was a very sort of not very serious scene or a light-hearted thing. I think that I used to seek the connection with those actors that I was working with, that I had when I was a kid on stage. So that's definitely helped for sure. I may not explain to actors in a way sometimes. Sometimes I think I resort to almost acting to try and explain something. It's just the way I express myself. I'm very, physical, and and I'm an emotionally driven, very sensitive person, so I like to speak in those terms, and sometimes that means I actually end up half doing a version of it for them and with them, and I'm sure some actors maybe don't like that. I don't know, but some directors very much just like to explain it, and I tend to straddle that, and I think that just comes from, I can't help it because I did it for so long, and sort of secretly enjoy it. Wish I could act as well sometimes because it's such a fun thing to do.
Do you ever put yourself into any of the commercials or projects that you make?
I mean, I do, in the sense that like half of the films is me changing gear, or it's my hand in the racing glove or my foot on the pedal or whatever, and we those sorts of things. Of course, if you're hands-on in this sort of filmmaking, it's very easy to kind of end up just doing it yourself because you know exactly what you need, and to tell an actor how to change gear, it's kind of a bit pointless if they don't nail it straight away. Obviously racing drivers, they get it, but even then sometimes you just don't want it to be exactly properly correct because it doesn't look right, so it's sometimes easier for me to do it. I've been in I had the back of my head in stuff, and I've been in the crowd maybe once or twice, but not as a proper featured performer. Again, I jump at the chance if it worked out, but in advertising, obviously there's clients that tend to want a certain person, and to expect me to fit that mold in that moment is quite a tough set of circumstances. So
because as an actor, they get like residuals done over time, like they get paid. So you could, put yourself in there and get some residuals.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree. Like, it would have to be the client asking for me to do it because they don't like.
Yeah.
I did a job recently where we lost an actor last minute and we had to find someone else. And we found this actor. And on the day, I was like, I don't think he's going to be great, but I'll get something out of him. And it was actually the worst. It was terrible. He was so bad, bless him. He tried, but we did like 30 something takes and it was going no. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was so simple. And I was this close to saying, give me the wardrobe, I'm going to do it. Because we literally were going into overtime and it was like the simplest shot ever. So I that was not really my fault because we lost this actor at the last minute. But that's the closest I've come to sort of insisting that I do something.
So I guess the casting process is important to try and find the right person that you can kind of screen test maybe or rehearse before and make sure that they can do the job so you're not stuck in that situation. Yeah,
I mean, if you've got actors in your story, in your commercial or short film, I mean, I'll keep it to commercials here because that's kind of obviously what I do. But casting is just the most important thing really, because you're only as good as the person that's trying to convey the emotion or the story in that moment. And you could have all the other ingredients in place, it looks amazing, everything's going great, but if your actor is a little bit dead behind the eyes or just not able to really carry off that believability, and then no one's going to really care. It's funny, you often see stuff where if you take a freeze frame from a commercial and it looks amazing and then you watch it and it's like and it's often because actually the casting is just not very good or not very interesting or doesn't really lift that the whole thing. So the casting is the heart, super important, and it's one of the hardest things to balance because it's the thing that the clients often take so much interest in, and rightly so. And if you differ in opinion, it's a tough job sometimes to try and sell who you want to be in it, because or you believe at least that actor's going to really make the difference. So if you win it, it's brilliant. If you lose those arguments, sometimes it can be quite difficult because you really feel like you're compromising. And I think people should, this isn't necessarily the time for advice bits, but I think just really taking the time to watch the casting tapes and not always going just with your gut reaction, but like kind of testing yourself. Like you'll have a gut reaction to somebody and go, oh my God, I love them. But then kind of taking walking away and coming back and interrogating it and really trying to work out what it was that you responded to, and just check that that's still there. Because, you know, sometimes you change your mind and you look back and go, God, I'm really glad we went with them. Like, they weren't the first choice at first in my mind, but it was only from thinking about it, or even showing your kind of DP or your editor. You know, I always do that. My top few favorites, I'll always run past the DP and the editor, because they've seen different things to me and they respond to different things, and you want to get those opinions, because you can't change it once those actors are locked in. That's the one thing you can't really change. Obviously you can work on their performance, but you're not, you know, you're not going to be able to change them. And most other things you can almost find a way to pivot around and change if you really have to, but casting is a kind of one-way street in most situations. Yeah, so vitally important.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, when there's like maybe a disagreement with like somebody, the client or maybe the agency, or like, do you think casting, like you said, is super important? Is that way, like, you got to pick your battles of like, what can I, you know, really push on and what can I kind of let go? Like, do you think casting is something that you would kind of like really go after if somebody's having a disagreement with you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess initially you've got to really, like, the first interaction you have with clients, you know, whether it's in the advertising agency predominantly, and then the clients after them. I think the first interaction is so important, because you've got to lay down the groundwork for like this collaborative environment, and that we're all here to work together, and that you're going to listen to them. And I think if you do that well, then you've got way better chance of being listened to in return when it comes to those moments where you go, all right, okay, look, we don't agree on this, but please trust me, this is why I think this person is better than that person. And you're more likely to have open ears to that than you are if you kind of set the wrong tone and just create this idea that, well, you've come to me, it's my decision, everything's got to be what I think. Not saying people say that out loud, but I think, you know, it can come across like that sometimes, or it could easily come across like that. So I think I've learned the diplomacy side of the job, and really, you know, and also because like sometimes they have good ideas as well. It's not always like the ideas you see on screen in my work. It's not everything has come from me. You know, it's really about listening to ideas from wherever they may come from. And often the creatives will say an idea that you don't like, and then 10 minutes later they'll say an idea you're like, oh, actually that's quite a good idea, let's try it. So if you've created that collaborative atmosphere, then they're way more likely to listen to you because you're listening to them and they feel heard. And I think I've learned that. I've made the mistakes along the way, of course. I've learned the hard way, but I've definitely had moments where I sort of fucked up and like was a bit resistant, and then they get resistant because, well, I'm not listening. Do you know what I mean? And then it's like this, and you're never going to get the best result. So, but yeah, so casting is definitely something that I fight hard for. If I really have a strong opinion and it's not quite being sort of heard, or they disagree, then I will push back and really try my best to convince them. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to just give in and go, okay, well, we have lost that one. But it's why, again, if you've really interrogated the casting, back to what I was saying before, then you're likely to have a second choice that's pretty good, right? You've really explored it and gone back and work. When you do the recalls, you've worked with the actors yourself, whether it's in the room or worst case on Zoom, as sometimes it is now. You've really seen who can do what and who's got strength and who's taking direction and who's interesting, or more importantly, who's really not. So if you have to suggest somebody else because they've rejected your first choice, you've at least got like, okay, I'm prepared for this. I'm prepared for the worst. And there's another actor that's maybe not quite as interesting, but solid, you know. But yeah, I think you got to fight for those things. It's just how you fight it is the key thing.
Cool. Yeah. So, do you want to talk a little bit about like the first film that you remember seeing that kind of inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two films. The first, and I've probably talked about these before, but the first film that really caught mine and my brother, who's 2 years younger, our imagination was Never Ending Story. And we had a VHS copy of it. And I'm talking, I was born in '83, so it was probably 1987. The film was 4 years old or something. And my brother was 2, and we used to watch that video like every week. And my brother, like, we just sat and watched it, and we were just mesmerized by it, and we just wanted to be in the story, and we wanted to be friends with the kids in the story, and and I think that the fantasy of that film definitely caught my imagination. But I was obviously too young to really understand about the working side of it. And I think, Jurassic Park was the sort of moment that I was old enough. I was 10 when that came out. And that film, as so many other kids that age, just like, it blew our minds, and it really caught our imagination. It was so fantastical and yet so real. And it was like, if you could do anything, you could go anywhere, it would be good to go to a dinosaur park. I mean, that would be like the best thing to do ever. And then there it was in the cinema, and you could kind of see it. And that film really, we bought, I think we saw the film, loved it, then we got the toys, and then we got like the book. Remember, they used to do they still do them, but the big books that are like that thick, and it's all of the behind the scenes photographs and text, and we poured over those books, and we were so obsessed with how they actually made it. It was the first time I remember like being interested in the visual effects, the camera trickery, all aspects of it, and the design process and the concepting process and the storyboards. So we really dove into that film from that angle, and I just loved it so much. I loved learning about it, and there was very little access in those days. There was no DVDs, there was no YouTube, there was literally that book, and pretty much that was it. So we used to make our own films on Super 8 in the garden with Jurassic Park dinosaurs, just like eating G.I. Joe characters and ketchup for blood, and it was all nonsense, but that was one of our regular pastimes. And I just feel like there's a couple of years of my life that were just consumed with Jurassic Park. We just were obsessed with it. So yeah, I think that film was the one that really got me thinking, there's people make these things, and that's a job, I think that's the earliest and most significant memory.
Oh, cool. So yeah, like, did you make stop motion animation films? Was that one of the early on projects that you started yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't afford a camcorder, like a video camera, which were obviously like very much out then. And my dad, I think, because like my mum and dad are both scientists, so they kind of have quite an analytical, and that's hence why my dad liked building motorbikes, I think, because he liked the challenge of, can I build this and how does this work, which is a sort of engineering element. His dad was an engineer, so he had that mixture of scientific, analytical, like, hunger and engineering acumen. And I think when I wanted to start making films at home for like my 11th birthday, he bought me a secondhand Super 8 camera from the newspaper, and it probably cost like the equivalent of $40 then. And it came with a projector and a screen and like, this little camera. So really good value for money. And my dad was excited by the mechanical nature of it. And like, I think it was also for him, that I would make the things, and then we would get the films developed and then project them and thread the film through the projector. And I remember like having this camera and sitting in my bedroom for hours on end trying to make plasticine stop frame animations that I'd start well, and a day or two in, you just get bored of the stuff, like, because it would just be so slow, and then you'd change it and do something else, and then you'd do something where you do fake stop motion, so you're actually hand animating a character and pulling the record trigger, so you're just trying to shortcut the process, and then you'd run out of film, send it away, get it back, and watch it back, and it would just be a load of just mess of all sorts. Oh, there's a moment. Oh, let's finish. There's a blob waving, and then it would finish because I obviously got bored. But I think that that trial and error and do something, watch it, see the mini rewards was, it was super fun and really kind of put into my head that like, yeah, you can get a really good result if you kind of do a load of weird manipulating things to the objects that you're filming. So that was sort of pretty much the limit of the making we had at home, because we just didn't have the equipment. We couldn't afford fancy video cameras. But I loved the Super 8. It was a great way to learn, and I still have all of the reels and somewhere in a box.
And did you do any editing, or like when was the first like experience with editing? Like did you do like VHS tape to tape kind of stuff, or like?
Yeah, I did, and I again, like now I look back and I feel really kind of lucky that I got to experience that like very painstaking linear editing process. I mean, even at school, I was making a crappy little documentary about guide dogs for the blind with a school camera. They had one camera, and it was a VHS camcorder, and then I had to have the two machines lined up and hit record, hit play, stop, and edit the thing manually. And I sort of learned that just myself by trial and error, really. And then once I got to sort of college, like you would call it sixth form, we call it sixth form, so like 16 years to 18 years old, then we were doing U-matic or Beta SP, tape to tape editing, and then we got Premiere. So I sort of learned Premiere on the computer, and then at university or what you call college, we learned on 16mm. So with the old Steenbeck, reel-to-reel process. So even though they had the computer technology, they wanted to teach us the principles of nonlinear editing, just so that and that was really good to learn. I think back then it was just taught you to think what you're shooting and think how it's going to edit. Obviously you can do anything you want now, but I still think that you've got to, as a director especially, you've got to think about what you're editing and how you might edit it, and let that help inform your creative choices, because you can shoot anything now and you can do pretty much anything you want, but you still only have so many hours in a day, in a shoot day, and you've got to the more choices you make, the more likely you're going to kind of end up with something that's going to be usable and work really hard. So yeah, that early editing, the tiring nature of it, and it forces you to kind of be careful whenever you record the camera if it's film, and it forces you to think about an edit, and because if you don't want to undo it, you'd have to go all the way back and chop it up again and re-stick it together. So good grounding, I think.
Yeah, cool. Because I know, like you said, like you see Jurassic Park, and it's kind of like I can do anything. It's like with animation, like CGI, like you could make the whole commercial like CGI, but I think you do a lot of like things practically, like like you said, changing the gear, everything's kind of like has a lot of energy towards it. Are there things where you do use CGI? Like I've seen some where like the panels fall off and stuff, but there's like practical elements within that. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the in-camera approach is certainly my preference, and I think it's just down to I think if you can kind of see it, then you can react to it, and whether it's right or not. It's not to say I don't like the sort of computer process, and I love doing visual effects and massaging the effects and trying to get the imperfections in there. I mean, that's super fun as well, and inspiring, because the people that do that are just incredible. But doing as much as you can in camera, for me, it just I don't know, I find the aesthetic that I often am going for, that doing it in camera lends itself much better to that, and you're just sort of creating something and seeing it and reacting with it in the moment, and I can adjust a series of parameters to change how it looks and immediately see the difference and go yes or no, And I think you do, for the most part, you do feel it. There is a difference. It's not to say you can't create amazing stuff with visual effects, of course, and there'll be jobs that I do where we're using that on purpose, and that's the best way to do it. But it is a different aesthetic, I think. So yeah, I love the sort of in-camera approach as much as possible, and augmenting those things like the one you just mentioned with the panels, to do that for real. Yes, maybe there's a world where that would be possible, but the budget and time is far beyond what we could do for real. So it made much more sense to do that in post-production. But I think the feeling of it, the ambition is that it looks as physical and real as it would if you did it for real. So it still informs the ideal approach that you can't do, still informs the way you go about the aesthetic of the visual effects, because that could look super sci-fi and clinical if you did it another way, for example.
Yeah, because I like the way, like the first Jurassic Park, you can see how they used a lot of practical effects with the raptors and was actual man in suits, and the big T-Rex was a big hydraulic machine. Yeah. And the actors could see it and react, whereas the later on ones, there's more and more CGI, and they're just looking around at a green screen, I guess. So that's when practical effects can help the performance, but also you can see it on the screen. You can see when something's kind of real. The audience might not be as sophisticated as a professional, but in the back of their head they can kind of tell is that real or is that fake? And then it's kind of, you've lost the magic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything you can do to have it in front of actors, really makes a big difference, especially if you're just explaining to them or temporarily putting something there to say this is what this is going to be and where it's going to go. And you might show them an animatic or a storyboard or something, just to try and get their head in their head what it's going to end up with. And you really see the penny drop. They're like, oh, I see what you mean now. And you're like, oh God, if I hadn't have shown them that, they just going in a bit blind. What do you they're not sure what you mean, because you've obviously spent weeks and weeks thinking about it and imagining it. So I know. So I think the more you can provide for the actors to sort of help give them a better the better that it's going to be, and easier for them to get to where you want them to be.
Right. Yeah, because most people on the set, they don't have time, or they don't maybe have that pre-production phase where everybody's explaining everything to them. So sometimes you might just get an actor or a stunt guy that just shows up on the day, and you have to quickly explain everything in 10 minutes, or I don't know how much time you have, but it's you got to really articulate exactly what you want. So do you break it down into shot by shot or scene by scene, or how do you kind of communicate what you want so that it's fast enough for them to understand, you mentioned?
Yeah. Do you mean more to do with crew or cast or things like that? I mean, it's obviously goes for both, but
the crew. So if the camera car guys turn up and you this is the shot we're doing today, guys, do you kind of do it with Hot Wheel cars, show you storyboards, and then you kind of on the radio talking to them? How does that work?
I guess it depends how you've come to how your pre-production starts and goes as a director. But for me personally, everything is always really thoroughly storyboarded. I really value that process, and I think just exploring how the whole thing's going to be told and finding the holes in, by drawing it all out, you see what maybe doesn't work from your ideas, and also what's kind of something you should explore more because you're onto something there. But without drawing it, you don't get to flesh that out. So starting the shoot, you've got a very thorough blueprint, and I need that. For me, I need that bedrock, if you like, right, this is the plan. And then at any point, your key crew, key department heads are able to throw ideas in or suggest a better way of doing something, and you can deviate from that plan, but knowing why you deviated from it, and then also at what point you need to drop back into that plan, because that tangent's all great, but it's only going to be a short moment in the film. You've got to, it's also got to come back to that plan, and that's really satisfying when you're elevating the story or the idea away from your blueprint, but the blueprint's there to kind of catch it when that moment has kind of come to its conclusion. So once you're on set, the drivers, if it's an automotive thing and it's lots of moving pieces and there's choreography at play, so whether it's arm cars or just drivers with hard mounted cameras or whatever, the storyboard is the first thing that I show them. And this can happen pretty quick because again, if you're working with the top team, a top team, then they get it quickly. So it's not like this is a long process, but in a short amount of time, I would show them the scene in the storyboard, and I'll try and give them an overview of the whole story as quick as possible. So in that NASCAR film, which you mentioned with the peeling back, obviously a lot happens in that film, but a lot of it is happening over the course of a racetrack in different time periods. So I think explaining what's happening in the story and the sort of emotion behind it and the feeling of the film is like the first thing, because then everyone goes, okay, we're telling history, it's about passion and racing, there's crashing, there's excitement, there's moment, then they go, okay, that's the sort of film we're making. If you just said, oh right, this scene we're doing this, they go, okay, cool, right. But if you give them the bigger picture, then everything you're then doing is in service of that, and just subconsciously they will be doing things differently because they know the point of the scene. The point is to build this moment of excitement, or we've got to feel the speed here because we've just gone from the 50s to the 8 whatever. And then I think it's describing the shot by shot, very specifically, what the shot is and what the key part of that shot is, and then it's sort of letting them almost at that point go, well, okay, to get that moment, if you want to have him hiding behind that car and at the last moment I pull out and reveal and surge forward, then I suggest we start there, and let the drivers and that's their skill set. It's not my job to say, well, you should start behind him and do 50 and you should then hit the gate, because I've learned that through doing it, that if you hire these amazing drivers, part of what they're coming with is the solution of how to achieve the shot, not just to drive it and hit the mark. It's about, all right, to really get that shot good, what we need a quarter-mile run-up, and I'm going to do this, and it can get incredibly technical, but obviously for the drivers, that's their language. So I think that's where I would hand to them as soon as I've painted, and then we try it. And obviously in the camera car, if it's an armed car, you've got 5 people. You've got the driver, who's super important because he is or she is, but usually it's if it's in America, it's a guy called Matt Moss, who's amazing, and his job is to, like a grip really, is to put the chassis in the right place so that the camera can be in the right place, because the camera can only go wherever the car allows it to go. So he needs to be in communication with the drivers in the picture cars in order to cue when they should cue their action, because he obviously knows how fast or slow he can move in order to get the camera to whatever mark. Then the arm operator, is again really at the mercy of the driver, because he can only swing that thing up and down, left and right. He can't make it shorter or longer. Well, unless there's one in Cape Town that does, but I don't like that. So his timing is really, really key, and it's all feel going off when the car's getting into position. The focus puller is very straightforward, but very difficult because you're moving around and he's got to know where you want the focus to be. What point do you want me to go from this car to that car and whatever. And then the DOP, who's usually the operator of the head. So once all those 5 people, and obviously me as a director screaming at them all the whole time, Once they all know the real point of the shot, you start doing it, and maybe you start at half speed. You, depending on how dangerous or how complicated it is, you start it roughly, and if it's looking kind of like, yeah, that's about right, let's just do it faster. The drivers will say, right, let's take it up to 80%, do it, and then really it's just about refining it, because I find that for the most part you get a pretty good shot almost straight away, which means you're doing something right. Like, okay, the idea works, the drivers can do it. It's not a shot that sounds good in your head, but in reality just doesn't look very good, or it's just too complicated to nail. And if I find that happens quickly, then we're in a good place, because then it just gets better and better and better. And over 3 or 4 or 5 takes, you're just compressing action, dialing up intensity. If that's the purpose, obviously, it might be a sort of very graceful shot, but if it's a high speed thing, then it's all about like trying to cram that as much action into as few frames as possible. Because you can always make something, you can always do a longer one, you can always do a slower take, that's easy. But if your editor's like, I wish you had this half a second quicker, then you'll be kicking yourself. And in commercials, like time is money when you're shooting, but like time is money when you're editing, because if you can't, if you can get an extra shot in or cut away from something sooner, it allows you to cut something else in the same amount of time. So often trying to compress action is what my goal is, until it either looks fake or silly, or just doesn't look you're not reading the action you want to read, or it becomes too dangerous and we go, right, that was fast enough, we're not going to go any further than that because life's too short and it's just a commercial. But that's the fun bit, is getting something half good straight away, and then just really finding the points to massage. Right, you should pull in earlier, or the driver says, I'm going to be in a lower gear so I can really be at the right rev point to react faster, or give me a longer queue, or whatever it is. Those are the points where you really notice the difference between a good team and an average team, because the ideas will, the arm operator will suddenly go, how about I start further out and start swinging earlier so I can be swinging faster by the time they appear. Those are all ideas that you might not think about as a director, but you need those key players to be kind of throwing into the mix of ideas that can make that shot better. And getting them on board, getting them excited about the shot. I think that's like I was saying before with the agency. I really try to get everybody excited, because the more excited people are and the more they realize they're a key part in this, then the more they're going to be like dialed in and wanting it to be great and coming up with those ideas. If there's this weird atmosphere and attitude from you as a director especially, then people are going to be less invested, and they're going to be thinking, well, why should I go the extra mile? And so I think anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, so you covered a lot of ground there, but like I've seen you talk about like being nice. Like being nice is important, like because you never know who you're talking to. But it's also, like you said, if everybody's on board with your idea, then they'll want to contribute 100%. And going back to like the arm car driving and stuff, I talked to like Samuel Hubernet, the stunt driver, and he was mentioning like some guys come from racing and they just speed off really fast, but they don't realize it's not about them, it's about the frame, and like letting the camera car keep up, because it's like obviously the car can speed off and the camera car is limited in what it can do. So it's more of like a dance in terms of like you're choreographing this whole like sequence, and it is a team environment where everybody has to work together. So like you mentioned, the communication is key, and letting everyone know like the story beyond just the shot is also to get them in that frame of mind.
Absolutely. I mean, that point that you were saying that Sam made is like so true. I mean, especially if you're shooting something that you want to look fast, it doesn't really mean you need to necessarily go that fast, and just speeding is not the only way to create speed. in camera. There's so many things we have at our disposal to cheat that in order to be more accurate, and obviously safety goes without saying, even though it's often overlooked by people, I think. But you can create the sense of speed in other ways, but by doing that, it allows you to be more specific with, and if you're just going fast, then all the accuracy goes out the window. And maybe that's just fine for a flyby or a very short moment. Of course, you need to be going fast for that. But the minute you start just racing around, I think the drivers have to think about the shot. They have to, which is why if you explain the shot, you've got a much better chance of them going, right, yeah, of course. Then I need to bear that in mind, because obviously if I'm over there, the camera's not going to see me. And it sounds simple, but especially for a driver, they've got a lot to do. They're really focusing and they're trying to hit a mark. To ask them, expect them to also think, like, do you think this would look like a cool shot if you were over the other side? And some of them find that very hard. Some of them, people like Sam and Reese, for example, they're masters at that. They really understand the camera, and they know what a good shot looks like. They've done it a lot. They've had a lot of experience, and that counts for a lot. But they've just got that innate understanding and feel. I think that where too close is too close. Where too far away is too far away, and it's not an exact science, but somehow they just have that feel. And some drivers just put their foot down and not consider that.
I think it might be something to do with like drifting, because they're all about like getting close to each other while doing like those crazy speeds, and like maybe that's something that.
That's a really good point. And I'm sure that if we say come close to camera, I mean, obviously racing drivers as well are very used to going right up behind somebody to overtake, or being they're used to proximity. But you're right, drifting is a different sort of thing, because it's kind of more balletic, and it's sustained, and accuracy is more important there because it is held, isn't it? And they want to get so close but not that close, because they don't want to hit each other. So yeah, I'm sure that comes into their skill set and allows them to be comfortable that close to another object, when we really want to get in there and up to the lens.
And then some of your commercials, there's like camera shake. Like I think you mentioned that you go and you like actually shake the camera yourself. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole sort of different way of doing it. There's different ways of doing it, and it's kind of horses for courses. I don't know how I first started doing it. I think I just experienced. I don't know. I learned pretty early on that shake needs to be, or shake creates a sense of speed, or just something that feels alive and uncontrollable, and that spontaneity and that unhinged feeling is what makes stuff look exciting, if that's your genre you're doing. And I was doing a lot of that a few years back, and still do, obviously, and love doing it. So recognizing that vibration and imperfection in general was a good thing, was like, okay, cool, right, so how do you do that? Because you sort of need to control imperfection. It's like a contradiction, really. So there's and I think over the years I've perfected ways, or I've experimented, and there's always other things you can try. But if you're I guess there's a few main ones. That if you're tracking a car and you're using an arm car, which is obviously designed to be stable and smooth, so you're starting with something that's inherently not fast, because an arm car's got a speed limit and there's no vibration at all, and the camera's relatively high. It can't go that low because the head's massive, and so you're already on the back foot. But you've obviously got a lot of plus points, which is you can all communicate. You can be very specific with the movement and that sort of thing. Now the older versions of the flight head, if you like, the Filmotechnic, flight head, they had and in fact the edge arm in the US. Well, Flighthead had an analog shaker box, which was just a box that, told the head to move in different ways depending on what you had dialed into the X, Y, and Z axis on the gyros on the stabilizers, and it sort of overruled what the operator was doing, and just caused the head to go berserk. And obviously, when the operator is trying to operate, their job's harder because the head is like, but that was the vibration, but also the imperfection, because the operator could never get a perfect frame with the camera doing that. There's just too, your brain would have to be moving your hands at exactly the right rate to match the, so you've got vibration, but you've also got an imperfect shot. And it's the way the movement of the camera wasn't perfect and was trying to hold on to a framing, was what gave it that imperfection and made it feel alive. And then obviously, under cranking the camera as well at different frame rates depending on the speed. This is something you get a feel for, I think, but being brave enough to go, fuck it, let's just do 18 frames a second. Like, you're like, oh, what, really? And you like, yeah, trust it, it's going to be when. And also vibration can only be so fast physically if you're using that sort of setup. So under cranking the camera just speeds up the vibration, so you get a more frenetic vibration. So then you start going, well, actually you don't need as much big vibration because you're speeding it up. So smaller movements are just going to be sped up, which, do you know what I mean? So you start changing the sensitivity of the shaker box depending on the frame rate you're going, depending on the speed you're actually able to drive. So all of those things become a kind of suck it and see experimentation. So you'll do a shot, and I always have a Pix, like a recording box on my seat in the arm car, because I like to, watch it back, play it back from camera, but at the right frame rate, and then scrub through the shot and almost like count the frames that I want to use and go, right, there would be an in point and there's an out point. That's a great moment. That's great, guys. That's wicked. And then I like, oh, that was, 42 frames. Let's just go 10 miles an hour faster, or take one frame off the FPS and let's try and get it in 35 frames, the same kind of action, So, and then you do it again, and of course you get it in 35 frames. You go, cool, we've got exactly the same cool shot, but in less time, which is sort of back to what I was saying before. But all of those parameters also change the the vibration and the shake. So that's the arm car. Then you've got nothing beats an unstabilized head. So you might be on a tracking vehicle still, but you're using a different vehicle, a faster vehicle, maybe with something with lower center of gravity, and you put a unstabilized 2-axis, just tilt and pan head on the front or back and off center, and you go out and you shoot the car, and the hard mounted nature of that head translates the vibration from the road surface straight into the camera. So you've got no way of reducing it other than by going slower or using a pickup truck which has got big springs, but obviously then doesn't have the speed and agility. So I think that's the rawest, and that's my favorite. Like, I think a lot of the work I've done on racetracks, Lamborghini, some of the other Acura stuff, was all done in that way, bolting a head onto a car, getting the lens as low as I could to the ground, and just going really pretty quick, pretty fast, because you can safely, because you're in a car that's designed to do that. And obviously there's drawbacks, but for the for the quality of the shake and the aggression of it, really, it's sort of hard to beat. And I sometimes operate that myself as well, because I'm not amazing at operating, but again, the imperfection of me not being as good sometimes helps. It's sort of like trying to hang on to something is I guess the best way of describing it. So that's that. And then the last thing is, or two last things really, is there's hard mounted shots, obviously, which you bolt your camera to the car that you're filming. and let the car do the job. So it's really just about finding the right angle, and that's sort of really classic filmmaking, and why I love them so much, because you get this, you know, mixture of sort of beautiful angle of a car, but going where the world around it is going by really, really, really fast, and of course you get all the bumps and shakes that you get from the road into the shot. And then I think the last instance that I'll use shake is in a sort of either a real close-up interior, or a poor man's process, we call it, you know, where you're cheating a gear change or a turn on the wheel or foot on the pedal or a head, you know, looking, for example, and you want it to feel like it's like the interior moment of the car you were shooting just now on the track or wherever. And often the easiest way to do that is to do it without driving anywhere, because then you have suddenly full control over where the camera goes and what it's doing, and you just can communicate to all the team and get the lighting right and all of that sort of thing. And in the past, I've sometimes used, like, if you've got an arm car on set, you know, all rigged and the camera's on it, and you don't want to really waste the time taking the camera off it and moving it, or you just, you know, want to be as quick as possible. I've actually used that before, where I've swung the arm over to the window of the car or opened the door and shoved the head in, for example, if it fits, and literally just grabbed hold of the flight head, turned all of the motors off, and just literally gone like that or hit it. You know, it's all carbon fiber, it's pretty strong. Just hit the thing, and the DP could actually be operating the head, you know, and I'm there banging it, and you're doing the same thing that you were sort of doing with the box, but it's just you. And you could also, like, sometimes I've like literally hugged it like it's a cannon and pointed the camera where I want it to go, and just had something, or have someone else banging the battery end of the camera, and you're just, and it's so hokey, but you know, it can really work, and you do it really fast. And that's the thing, you're just trying to find solutions that allow you to get the shot quick, because you want to move on. So yeah, that's the main ones. And the last one, sorry, are which is also an amazing piece of equipment, is the Claremont filter, which is what they use in Saving Private Ryan. You know, it's where we sort of first saw it on the big screen, I think. And it's just two plates of glass with hydraulic fluid trapped between, and the two bits of glass kind of move on axis, and that goes in front of the lens. And you literally dial up how much shape the glass moves, or and it really works well. It has drawbacks, like in cold it can fog up a bit, and it's a bit clunky and cumbersome, and it's not that cheap to hire. So you can't use it every time, but that's a great way of doing like a close-up of a driver in a car whilst you're driving. But you want to make it more exciting. You can't go that fast if you've got someone handheld next to the driver. And also, if your window there's not much going on outside the window, you know, if you don't have moving trees or moving racetrack stand, then the Claremont filter can just add that like element that you want, that makes it sort of still feel fast, so that when you cut from outside to inside, suddenly it doesn't go, ugh, you know, which you often see. You know, I've seen that a lot, where there's some cool driving shots and then you go inside and it's like, okay, it's driving Miss Daisy, you know. So yeah, those are, I guess, for the most part, the sort of techniques, and you're just about picking the right one for the shot or what your budget allows for.
Cool. Yeah, because it sounds like kind of going back to the Jurassic Park thing, where it's, you know, in camera practical effects is a lot more like organic, like getting the right motion blur, and like, because you can do it in post, but you're not going to get those like imperfections or like that like spontaneity of like, oh, what is that? Like, there's some things that you can get in camera where it's like, oh, I didn't expect like the light streak to go like that. Like, how could you think about it in post, like, oh, just make this go like it's hard to, and using all those techniques that you explained is like experimenting and finding the right, like if you're only using a few frames, like how much footage do you actually film? Like, do you film for hours and just pick a few frames, or like do you get those kind of shots that you're looking for?
It's probably is different on every job, and it really depends on like the schedule to some extent. And if you can, sometimes you might be doing, like if you're on a racetrack, you might be doing a scene where there's multiple elements and you can pick up different bits in one run, you know. So you might go, well, we're going to start chasing you, and we're going to do this, and then halfway on the radio I'll be like, right, we're going to switch to the front now, just change direction on the track so the lighting is better or not, depending on the situation, and we're going to do the same thing from the front. And you know, once you know the team, you can be quite quick to go, right, we're now going to do this. You don't need to every time stop and explain. Like if it's something you've done before and the guys get it, you can be very sort of nimble. So often the footage might be a lot of footage, but within that you've really covered off a whole series of moments, and sometimes they're moments that you just finding because you see something happen that looks great and you go, okay, that wasn't right from this angle, this is not a good shot, but what you did look great. If we go over there, that thing you just did will look amazing. Can you do that again, but get closer, whatever, we're going to be facing you instead of following you. And that becomes a spontaneous thing. And then you might go, well, actually, if I'm going to use that, I need another angle of the same action. So for continuity, you know, which is, again, I think a huge thing that I care about, you know, as I say, back to the editing. If I'm going to use that shot, what am I going to cut to from it? And what am I going to cut to it from? And if I've just got one shot where this thing happens, well, I'm forced to go elsewhere, you know, and I might be left going, well, it's a great shot, but I can't use it because it doesn't cut to anything, or at least doesn't cut well. So thinking, going, okay, that was really cool, but we need another angle of the same action. So reset, guys, we're now going to go here. We're going to start really, really wide and come towards you. You do exactly the same thing, but know that that's what we're doing. And then you get, you know, the same moment over multiple angles, which is, I know it sounds really obvious, but if you were doing a scene with actors talking in a bar, you wouldn't just do one shot. You would cover it from multiple angles to give you the chance to edit. And I think action, you know, it's easy to overlook it because you're just grabbing great shots. But if you're not thinking how you're going to use them, and what's going to get the best out of that shot is go to another shot that feels like it came straight after that one, and you haven't gone any. You know what I mean? Time is linear in that moment in the film. That's a real time. We've seen this, then we've seen that, and it was like the same thing. So I think, you know, that's where the spontaneous and finding stuff can happen, and often where we'll shoot quite a lot in a short period of time because we're finding something cool, and then I'm really going through all the best angles of that action. And I'd rather do that than I'd rather have 5 angles of, you know, 2 good pieces of action than 10 different shots of cool things that don't really like go together. Do you know what I mean? And that, I feel, is really important, like in terms of the filmmaking side of it, is like, what's the purpose of this shot and what's going to follow it? Because you've got to, you know, otherwise it will just be a cool shot amongst a load of other shots that maybe are cool, but they don't really speak to each other. And that can really elevate a film, you know, and really make it feel kind of special because it's narratively constructed, even though it's just action. It's, you know, yeah. So I was wanging on again, but it was
that's good. So basically you're saying you'd rather create a sequence rather than just a montage. So a sequence of, like, you know, you're trying to tell a story of all these shots that fit together as one cohesive kind of piece, rather than a sunset here and like a shot of the ocean. It's like where they don't really connect. Whereas if you're doing like a car, like look at the eyes, look at the wide, tight, close, like all those different angles.
Continuity of action. I think cars, because it's easy to overlook the body language of a car and what it's doing. People, it's very clear. If someone picks up a glass, takes a drink, and then walks over there, you're going to need a shot of him picking it up, and another shot maybe of tracking them to the door, and another. Like, you wouldn't just do a wide. I mean, you could just do a wide, of course, and that may be right for that moment. But in general, but where if a car is doing an overtake, well, there's loads of nuance within that you could explore from the interiors, but also just from the action. And if you just shoot it from one angle that looks cool, then you're not necessarily maximizing the impact of that moment. And you could get 2 shots in the same screen time of the same thing, but from different angles, which makes it twice as exciting or twice as fast, because you've shown like multiple angles of the same action. You could shoot 5 flybys or counter moves, which are really exciting when you do them, and they're all great shots, but you're not going to use 5 counter moves in a 30-second commercial, because the whole thing's going to be counter moves, and they lose their impact really fast. It's like drone shots. You could spend 3 hours doing drones, but general terms, I'll try to use 1, maybe 2 drone shots in a commercial, because they lose their impact. So you've got to think about where you're using these moments and what's going to elevate them even more by the next shot.
Cool. And so working with like the advertising agency or a client, like I'm sure you've built it up over time where you've taken more and more risks, or you've like just communicated like, this is going to have camera shake, this is going to be dark, or this is like, because I'm sure there's a lot of times where they're like, that's so dark, or why are you shaking the camera, or why is this out of, like, so how do you kind of navigate the agency side or the client side?
It's a good question. I think on the camera shake front, I've been relatively fortunate, because I think most of the time they might, if it's a job which has got, speed or excitement in it, they may well have hired me because of the work on my reel, and so you've got the authority to say, well, this is the way we do it, and this is what we're doing. And also, if it looks cool, they're not going to go, oh, we want it. I mean, they might say, can you do a safe version, do a slower version, but they won't. I've never really had them say, oh, turn off all the shaking, or at least they'll let me get what I think is right, and then maybe I'll have to do something slightly safer or slower just in case. But the darkness thing is certainly a big issue with a lot of car clients. I don't know where it came from, but there's some weird sort of feeling that darkness is bad, and in every other respect, it's like the best things happen at night. The best stuff looks great at night. Obviously daytime can look great too, but with car clients, they tend to get very paranoid over darkness, and obviously we're lucky that camera sensors these days are extremely good and forgiving, and usually there's tons of data there. It's important that you're showing them the right thing. If we get into like LUTs and what monitor that they're looking at, and making sure that you're not creating a problem for yourself. If you're doing a darker scene, then you might want to just compensate slightly with what you're showing them, knowing that the information's there, but you might have a LUT, but they might not, or they might have a different LUT on the client monitor, because you want to avoid that conversation on set, because it will just suck away time and likely end up damaging the visual qualities of the shot. And you'd rather have them feel okay and know that in the grade you've got the option to keep what you intended. But it is difficult, and so often I've had we need more light, put more light, and then you have to have that conversation with the DP who's like, oh my god, really, like this, it's so bright, it's already when there's a point where we're not going to win this battle, we have to just and it's heartbreaking, because sometimes you're like, no, trust me, this would look amazing, and anyone watching this will think that car looks amazing, but there's this weird darkness phobia that a lot of clients have, and you just have to remember, well, it's advertising, they're paying the bill, and you sometimes have to compromise, but
do what they say. So going back to what you mentioned about like not having too many drone shots or too many of the same like pass by shots. Like I did a documentary about Quincy Jones, and he mentions about when he's doing music, he's like, I'll add a bit more gravy on here, or there's too much spice, or put a little bit, like he kind of describes his music in terms of like food. Like, so I was going to talk about like your music choices. So you have some like specific music choices that aren't necessarily the same as like other people. Like, where do you get that inspiration, or how, like, what's the thought process behind the music?
Good question. I mean, yeah, music's one of those really kind of weird things that you can have a track in your mind, like right from the very beginning, and it can live with you all the way through the process, the shoot, and you edit, you even start editing to it, and you love it, and then the editor might kind of come along and go, I've found this track, I'm going to put it on, and they haven't lived with it like you have, so they're fresh, right? And they're just reacting to what they're seeing and hearing, and you might first go, oh, that's not what I had in my head at all. But sometimes that's happened, and days go by, and you start to realize, actually, I was just like hung up on this thing because it spent so much time with it, and maybe it was relevant at a certain point, like it got to a core emotion that I was trying to find in the film, but didn't ultimately deliver on the other things that the music needs to do. And editors tend to have, or at least in my experience, have a really, really good like sixth sense for music, finding music that you wouldn't have found necessarily straight away, just because they're coming at it fresh and they don't have all of the sort of emotional baggage that you've had in that process of making it. So quite often the music changes from what I originally had in mind, but I do feel like for the most part the music is at least emotionally what I wanted it, what I set out for it to be. It's not often that you end up with something completely like, I mean, Audi, the orange one with the rings, the donut one, that's a great example of where like half of that film is the music that's on it, in the sense that we've tried lots of other tracks and they all sounded cool, but none of them had that element and that tone and that the way it speaks to you as an audience in a different way. There's something else going on there that is more playful, so, and that wasn't the song at the beginning of that film. When we started making that, we didn't know about that song. I mean, hadn't considered it. So it doesn't mean you always have the right track, but I always knew that I wanted something that would be beautiful and emotional, because it was going to be slow motion, and counter to this aggressive act that the car was doing. But I wasn't anticipating something that also had these lyrics that just seemed to speak perfectly to the story. So I think, making playlists of music early on is something I always try and do. And I think that's really healthy, because you just explore things, and music's such a powerful tool to convey emotion. So you might be like, often when we're filming with actors, that sometimes I'll be playing bits of music just to create a vibe and an atmosphere. And equally, when you might shoot a shot, and you're in the arm car, and I'll play it on my phone while the shot, and I go, and you might play some Hans Zimmer or something, and just to see it go with the visual, and you immediately go, oh, that just connects. And of course, I'm not going to use that piece of music, but you're onto something fun if music is bringing it to life. And then obviously clients always have very strong opinions about music. I think that's it's the most disappointing stage in most commercial processes, is the music stage, because more often than not, you've found a great track, and more often than not, they want something else.
Right.
And
do you get a chance to like work with a composer or like create your own kind of original score at any point?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, probably 60-70% of the time, we're composing from scratch. And that's like, I don't know, it's such a special process, and you always feel so privileged because you know, musicians are like, I mean, they're just amazing. I can't play an instrument, you know, as I can't draw. I've got a very narrow skill set. So when you're with a musician or a composer or writer, you know, it's just mind-blowing having them kind of create something that really captures the thing that you had in your head, or you give them a reference and they go and make something that's very much theirs. It's not a copy, but it still sort of gets that core emotion and feeling that you heard in the reference song. So yeah, working with composers is so much fun. And yeah, I think the best experiences I've had are where I've really gone in and treated it like you would if you were filming something. You've given them emotional responses and talked about what it is you're feeling and what you don't like in terms of emotions. And musicians understand, you know, you don't need musical knowledge to, you know, obviously you can pinpoint sound if you don't like it, but I tend to be more like talking about music in emotional terms, and I love that process of back and forth, because they just kind of, you know, it's like a different language, isn't it? And they just turn your words into music, and it's like, whoa, that's amazing. Yeah, and the editor is a key part in that. You know, a good editor will be kind of so important in that music journey, because they're cutting to it. The music's got to work with the edit and vice versa. So it's a real back and forth, trying to get the music as quick as possible, but obviously you need some enough of an edit to have the music connect with it. So it's a tough back and forth, that, but yeah, it's always
yeah. So maybe talk about a little bit about the first car project. Was it the Audi R8? Was that your first car commercial?
I think it was. It was I think Jaguar was very close to that time. I can't remember if it was before or after, but Audi was definitely the first film that was like, you know, significant and got some attention and seemed to kind of catch people's eyes, you know, not just the car people's eyes, at least, which was always and still is always my goal. Like, I want to make stuff that's not just going to appeal to the target audience, you know, or the obvious audience. Yeah, Audi was the first time that happened. Yeah, do you want me to talk about that
Yeah.
project?
So basically, you had a job in an advertising agency, and they presented this project to you, or did you present it to them? Did you see like a brief? Like, how did it all come about?
Yeah, so I joined a production company. I was in-house at an advertising agency for about 6 years, a digital one in London, and we were just making all sorts of digital video, whether it was old banner ads, remember, that were driven with Flash back when it was a thing, websites with interactive video, some small commercials as well. We were doing all sorts of everything. So I was getting a lot of experience shooting in studios, doing a lot of special effects, relatively low budget, and building a showreel, although the showreel was kind of all over the place and not very high profile. So I got signed by Rogue Films at the time in London, and I think they were thinking, well, Mark seems to know about digital filmmaking, you know, so maybe it would be good to have somebody like that on our roster, because digital at those days was just like 2012, 13, or 14, I can't remember. And the irony was there was very little of that work coming to traditional production companies. And I was fine with that, because I wanted to explore, you know, narrative and performance and more kind of linear filmmaking. An advertising agency came in with this script for Audi. They had very little money, and it was to demonstrate the new kind of engine gearbox, and was going to be a print ad as well, where you would scan a QR code or whatever it was then, and it would then play this film. So you might see the billboard on a wall and then put your phone up to it, and then it would play this YouTube video of the engine sound kind of going through the gears. And so I got in on it because it was super low budget, and they kind of just needed someone to capture it, right, on a rolling road, in a studio or in a garage, but obviously make it look a bit nicer than just someone putting a camera. And I just saw an opportunity I was like, well, 60 seconds of that is pretty, not that it's dull, but it's not like, from the first frame, if you're just filming the back of this car, then you already know what you're watching, right? You'll just listen. You might as well not even see it, really, because it's just not moving. So for me, I was like, how can I add some loose narrative to this and make this film feel like you were discovering something and you weren't sure what you were watching? And I kind of went to sort of sci-fi in my head, and I wanted it to feel very grounded. So I just pitched them a very short treatment. It was like 1 or 2 pages. I can send it to you if you like. I've still got it, I think. And it was really just an exploratory journey around the car as it came to life, and then exploded out of the block, so to speak, and went through the gears. And the camera was revealing the car the whole time, and then eventually revealed that the back of the car was off. And that was, they wanted the back engine, visible, so they wanted the bodywork off, which I thought was also really brave. But I just wanted to get to that later, so that there was some payoff. There was like, things kept unfolding until the very end. And they loved the idea and gave us, a little bit of money to go and make it. And we did, and we just sort of kind of did it very low-fi. We used a small Technocrane, so all the camera movement was operated. It wasn't motion control, and the driver just went off cue. So as soon as the camera got to that point that we wanted it, we told him on the radio, like, hit it, and he did. I think we did about 10 takes of it, and like blew a load of hard drives. With the vibration in the room was so loud that it was like killing the hard drives. And I think the car survived, but the engine, the gear, I think there was a bit of damage done to it was the exhaust, I think, was a bit afterwards, because it was so that was how that one went. And then a little online film ended up being, unlike the X Factor final, and it just went everywhere, which was amazing because a load of people got to see it.
You said you added a little sequence to it, whereas a little story where they could wait for the reveal. So you kind of build that like tension, and people are like watching it. And it's probably like, with the way that like engagement and click-through rate and watch time works, is like back then, I'm sure it's the same of how like things go viral, is if they watch it for a certain amount of time. Like if you just shot the back the whole time, like people might have clicked off before it was able to. So it's like, things like that. And coming from, like you said, the digital background, like you said, early days of digital marketing, and you kind of probably learnt all those kind of things of how the internet works, and you're able to create a viral hit, and that was able to, I guess, launch your career further. And then from there, you were able to do the Jaguar one, and then you did the Spin. Was that the third one, like the R8 Spin? Did they?
There was, just quickly on what you were just saying, I think that you really kind of like understanding, obviously, how things get picked up and why people like them. But for me, it all comes from some story, and in that case, a very, very simple one. But if you can find a way to intrigue people, if you're intrigued, you're naturally engaged because you're intrigued. You're not engaged. If you're not engaged, you're not going to be intrigued. And if you're intrigued, then you must be engaged. So, if you can make something feel it has some sense of story, like a beginning, a middle, and an end, I feel like that just can elevate anything, and it can, in that case, just a car doing very little, really. And it did. And I think with anyone that's working in, people watching, or they're doing automotive stuff, even if it's low budget, just thinking about how can you apply some form of narrative. And I don't mean literal story necessarily, but, visual unfolding of something. I think it can really can really maximize like the impact of something, just applying that sort of thought process. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I think the orange, the Audi rings was the second Audi film I did. So we did that off the back of the first one, with a very different brief. And it was a much more technically challenging idea, that because we really didn't know if it was going to work. It's kind of terrifying, actually.
Is that the selfie stick on the?
Yeah. I'd sort of had this idea that I wanted to do a shot, because the Filma Technic brought out the time it was called the Russian Arm Mini, and then it's now called the Dynamic, which is, so it's just a much smaller, lighter weight thing. And the idea was the whole purpose that you could fly with it, so you could pack it up and put it on the car when you got there. You didn't have to travel the car to where you wanted to film. And there were limitations with it, but the main plus point was you can put it on anything with a roof rack. And when I heard about this, I was like, and I'd seen a demo of a Jaguar being driven on a track, filming with it. And at one point, the camera just like looked back, and I was like, we could use this to film us. And then I was just looking for the right moment to try and explore that. And then this idea of making the rings out of a donut from the tire marks, the last shot being that, and speed isn't everything. You're not allowed to show a car going fast in the UK. So slow motion, doing a donut, how can we do that? How can you make that shot cool, as opposed to just shooting a car in slow motion, which we've seen a million times? And I just thought, okay, there's that idea with the mini arm that could work. And then it was like, okay, I pitched the idea to them, they loved it. And then it was like, okay, but does the R8 have a roof rack? And of course it doesn't really, or didn't. So we managed to find a way to build like a steel frame, took the engine bay off, the boot and the glass off, and bolted it to the chassis, this sort of box frame section, so the arm could be mounted onto the top of that and be at the right, because of course the roof of the R8 is forward, and the arm wouldn't be at the right circumference from the center of the roof, so we had to move the arm back, so that the camera could go all the way around the car, basically. And yeah, we built that, put the arm on it, and it all looked great, and it all, without moving the car, it all went round. I was like, this is going to look great. And then of course started trying to donut an R8, which is very difficult because it's got a lot of computers trying to stop you doing it. And we eventually got it to donut. There's an amazing driver called Ronnie Paul who managed to get it into circles. But once the camera was on, there's so much centrifugal forces, and the stabilized head was like the mini flight head, and it just didn't have the strength in the motors to compensate for the huge kind of lateral throwing forces that the donut was creating. So for about an hour and a half, we were just like, oh God, it just doesn't work. Like whenever the car starts a donut, the camera's like flung looking at the ceiling, and the DP who was a guy called German DP called Bernd Wanderleck, he's one of the best operators of a stabilized head in an arm car in the world, like right up there. And he was looking at me going like, I'm looking at the ceiling, and by the time I find the car with the joysticks, the car's run out of donut power. The computers have shut it down. You only got like maybe 3 circles before the car would just go boom and stop it. So anyway, we basically worked out that if we started with the camera facing the wrong way, and let the car do the initial action of flinging it, it would spin around keep spinning and end up looking at the car itself. And at that point, DP could grab hold of it, so to speak, with the joysticks and have a point of reference, and hang on just long enough for it to do its 1 or 2 circles, whilst the arm operator was rotating the arm in the car. And it kind of worked. And once you played it back in slow motion, we had this really beautiful sort of slow, graceful thing. But in reality, it was just like a screaming car and like a load of people going, "Oh God, don't hit the wall, or don't smash the camera on the floor."
Yeah, so a lot of people, like, they just see the finished product and they don't realize how much work goes into these like 30-second, 60-second commercials. But yeah, you can just it was easy,
I mean,
I'll do it again.
You want it to look like that to the viewer, I suppose, but yeah, it's very rarely the case.
Yeah. And then just maybe talk about a little bit about how, like, what's the process of finding a production company, like, and maybe some advice for somebody who, like you mentioned, about telling a story with what you're doing, maybe have a few examples, like do spec work. Would that be a way to, like, if you don't have like much to show, like when you're going to a production company, like what do you give them and what do you like tell them, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like now with camera technology and equipment in general, like young filmmakers, I think they've got so much access. Even I know it's not cheap, but I feel like there's at least a lot more access now than there used to be to equipment, and you can create good-looking images more easily. So like that part of it kind of is less of a problem now, less of a barrier, let's say. So you really are relying on your kind of artistic choices and for your work to stand out, because there's sort of nice imagery everywhere. As like I was saying, you can see a beautiful still from a piece of work and it's gorgeous, and then you play it and you're like, so didn't live up to what I thought it was going to be in motion, and I think that's really the challenge for young filmmakers, is to I'm not saying everything has to look beautiful at all, but it's got to connect with you in some way, whether that's through humor or through beauty or through just the concept. Is so interesting in itself. It doesn't always require aesthetics, but I think if you're going to do a spec piece of advertising, to go on an advertising showreel, to pitch to production companies, if you want to try and get signed, or if you want to be freelance but you want to have work that will, then I think, the idea is super important, and it's the hardest thing really, is finding a good idea that's simple and so it's achievable, but just is a simple concept. And once you have an idea, it's really about trying to kind of be really strict with yourself, and like, how can we condense this idea into its simplest execution in a way, and kind of think about less being more, and picking your battles and putting the resources into things that are really going to elevate it. So I think one of the things I've learned is like, experience is this thing that you can't buy really, or not to yourself. You can, and it's the one thing that the more you work and the more you do things, you really see that experience like playing out, right? You go, oh, now I can have the confidence to say this or do this because I've done it before, or I've that thing's unlocked this and allows me to do this. And when you're starting out, experience is the thing you don't have. You can have all the ambition and enthusiasm and ideas even, but you don't have experience. So I think with a lot of young filmmakers, maybe sometimes you see that they grow up working together in a little group, or with you might have a director and a DP that are working together, and they're obviously then the first person they call when they go, right, we're going to go and make this little thing. I've got this idea. We've got this car for this. We've got got some equipment. We've got a location, and they kind of go out there together, and that's lovely. And I'm all for working with your friends and being loyal and forming those long-term relationships, but I do feel especially for all heads really, but directors, DPs, editors, you need to try. I think one thing that can really help is to try and like find the polar opposite of you, in the sense, if you're a young director, find the most experienced DP that you can convince to work with you on your little idea. Like, just convince them in any way you can, to help you out, because their experience, and what they've done before is going to like pour all over your idea in a lovely way, in a really helpful way, and help focus you and just guide you and listen to your ideas and say, I see why you're thinking that, but trust me, this will look better, or this might be better. And I think if you just go with the people that you are comfortable with when you're young, there's a danger that you don't elevate each other. Of course you push each other, but you don't have the ability to use experience to show someone something they hadn't done before or considered. And I think when I was starting out, the minute I worked with a DOP that was super experienced, like immediately saw, I was like, holy shit, fuck, that's okay, right, now I'm learning something, and now this stuff looks like I really wanted it to look, because I've got someone with such experience. They've seen every scenario and they know how to tackle it. So not only are you getting stuff done more efficiently, but you're learning, you're watching how they work, and they've worked with hundreds of directors. Your DP friend might be great, and they may well be a great DP, but they haven't worked with hundreds of directors yet. So, I just think that's a really good way of pushing yourself. And the same for DPs, and it's harder in a way because, directors are going to want more, but trying to get with other directors, even if they're not experienced, but just different people that you're not just comfortable working with, because you see then different methods, different ways of doing things, different approaches that you can then build into your own way of working. And that is learning, and that is so then you're acquiring your own experience. So I think that's probably the best bit of advice I can think of that's relatively doable, because there's all sorts of things you could say, but you're like, yeah, but how do you but I just think like surrounding yourself and trying to get people to work with you that you admire and have way more experience than you is a really great approach, because you're just going to benefit straight away. And you might not make an amazing piece of work, but you will have learned something, and that means the next thing you do, you'll start from a better position at the beginning.
Because I think like film school can only teach you so much, because like the theory, but it's like you learn a lot more on the job, and then the better mentors you have on a job, the quicker you'll learn. So you can go and work for like a TV station and not learn anything, because they're just not the best. But you can go and work on a film and learn more like in a week than you have in like 3 years of film school. So finding the right mentors, I guess, is part of it. Did you have, I guess you've worked with a bunch of DPs that you've learned from. What about like producers? Do you learn like how to do things through them, or like the production company? Like what kind of key people are there along the way that you kind of have learned through your career, and like what have they taught you?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think producers are definitely in many ways, like unsung heroes, and the people that can really just say a simple thing and make you go, oh, that's interesting. Like a good producer is someone that is creative as well, and producing is certainly not about number crunching. That's part of their job. But I think if you can find a producer that's got a creative edge to them and a point of view and a taste level, then they're your closest. They've been with you from the beginning of the job right through it, and they know everything that's going through your head, because they've had to put a line item cost next to it. So getting them to weigh in, and if they've got some experience, they will have produced lots more work than you've shot, right? Just because of the nature of they can work on multiple things. And I think producers have definitely pushed me and challenged me. Even at the treatment stage, they've maybe said something like, this could happen, or they could say that, or be funny if that, and I think just being around producers and listening to what they think is a good idea is really, really helpful, because they're pragmatists as well. Like they naturally are going to want to say something that is in some way, in their view, achievable. That's not to say that you don't want to think of ideas that aren't. Of course you do, but it's really good having an idea thrown at you that's also like pretty sensible and not that, you know what I mean, like crazy to achieve. And it just provides you with that ammunition and things to fine tune with, you know, from creatively. So I think, yeah, good producers, and if you work with producers that aren't like that, I now really see the difference. Like, you're like, it's a totally different process. If the producer is more concerned with the budget and the numbers, if they're not inputting on the final product, then you're missing out. You're missing a key driver of what's going to make the thing you're doing better and better. So I think, yeah, listening to them and really when you're younger, like knowing to like ask them for their opinion. I think often you perhaps think as a director when you're starting out like, oh, it's all on me and I've got to solve this and I've got to do this, but like, everyone around you is there to help you. You know, ringing the DP or an editor before a job, like even when you're pitching on a job, if you getting their opinion, like that can really make a difference to the idea that you were not sure about. They might say one thing and it just completely clicks into place and you're like, that's it, that's what I was missing. And recognizing that, you know, you're missing something, where can I find it? And a producer, production designer, and editor, you know, they're all people you can kind of ask if you've got access to them. I think that's super important, just to, you know, push them for their thought. What's your thought of this? What's your opinion on this? Tell me if you don't like it. Tell me if you think you can make it better. So yeah, that's definitely something I learned, and I was lucky enough to be around a producer that was, you know, had his creative head on as well, and would sometimes just say things, or, you know, why don't you get them to do it, like play it down a bit, or why don't you get, you know, whatever. And you might not even know, you're like, what? Okay, I'll try that. And you do it and you're like, oh, that was quite funny, you know? So yeah, it's just trust, isn't it? You got to, if you trust the person and you don't understand what they're saying, but you trust them, the chances are there's something to it. You just don't get it yet.
Yeah. And just talk about like the process. What's the process with, like, I know every project's different, but like in general, there's a production, advertising, or client that goes to advertising agency, whether it's like, say, for example, like a car company like Audi or BMW or whatever it is. They go to advertising company, and then the advertising agency goes to a production company, and they might already have like an idea, like a brief, that then they will go to the directors. Or is there an agent, like a sales rep along the way, that kind of pitches it to the advertising agency, and then it gets to you? So what is that? You're not really involved, but what is that process there?
Yeah, I mean, it's the process is pretty much the same all over, like globally, although in America, yes, you have sales agents, which I'll explain. So yeah, the client will have an advertising agency, and some clients are in-house, they'll have their own, but that's not very common. So they'll have an advertising agency who strategize, you know, work out who they want to target and strategically how they want to, what's the messaging. The creative department will then take that strategy and write scripts that capture that idea and help hopefully market the product, which they'll pitch to their clients. The clients will agree one and go, right, we're going to make that. And then the agency will look at all the directors that they have at their disposal at the various production companies. And in America, the sales reps work for the production companies as third-party companies, and they go out and show the showreels as the directors to the various agencies, knowing what they're working on and saying, oh, have you seen this person that might be a good fit for that? If you're going more in a comedy direction or more in a surreal direction, like these directors maybe should be on your radar. And that happens all the time, you know, across the world. They'll then pick 3 directors, the creatives at the advertising agency, pick 3 directors that they think best fit the brief based on the show reels. Now, it's always frustrating because there's this classic conundrum of, well, we want to see the work on the reel, you know, and obviously you might not have the work on the reel, or because no one's made it yet, or you haven't had a chance. But good creatives, open-minded ones will look for the skill set in the reel. They'll go, well, look, they can work with actors, or they know how to make cars look good, or they, because they work with the right sort of DPs and they communicate the right ideas. And, so they're looking, good creatives will look at the reel as a whole and see your strengths and go, if you put all that together, we reckon they could do a good job on this script, which isn't represented on their reel in one film. But sometimes they're quite narrow in their thinking, and they want to see, the piece of work on the reel already. And that's maybe just because they've got to sell you as a director to their client. They've got to go back and say, right, these are the 3 directors that we're going to ask to do a treatment and a budget for your script. And if the client looks at those show reels and goes, well, I don't see any comedy and whatever on there, then, you know what I mean? They could end up going to have to find a new person. So I do get, there is a challenge for the creatives there. They've got to have trust in their clients. They've got to trust them. And when that's there and the creatives are open-minded, it's really great, because you then get a chance to work on something different. So then you write a treatment, you get approved to pitch, right? Great. You're on the pitch of 3 different directors. You then do a conference call with them first. So you'll sit on one of these and go, cool, tell me about your idea and how did you come up with it? And okay, and then you just ask them questions. It's an exploratory chemistry call, really. You sort of want them to know that you're open-minded and collaborative, and you also want to give them a taste of some of the ideas you've maybe had. You get these scripts, and you usually, at least for me, there's like 2 or 3 things that will immediately come to my mind. I'm like, okay, I don't like that. I want to change it to this. I do like that, but I want to add that and whatever. And sometimes you're like, oh God, I really want to completely rewrite this, because I get what they're trying to do and I love the strategy and the line, but I just don't buy the actual script, And then that call is the place where you can put the feelers out. How open are you to changing this? Like, how much scope have we got? Could it be a woman instead of a man in the driver's seat? I've had that many times. Could it be this? Could it be that? I was thinking, I like that idea, but did you ever think about doing that? And you just see their reaction, and of course this is something you really learn. And I think that in America, especially, the conference call is really important, because it's where they're going to pretty much decide whether they think they like what you're saying and they can work with you. I'm not saying it's where you win the job, but you can certainly lose the job on the call, because you might, not get the signals that they like what you're saying, but they will never get it sold back to their client. So stop pushing it, so that you've got to be very sort of political as well. You've got to read, like, on those calls, you've really got to just take it softly and listen to their reactions. And obviously reactions can be misleading. So someone could be like, yeah, great. And then actually you lose a job and you find out they didn't like, and you're like, well, he said, yeah, great on the call. So you never know where you really stand. But that's the intention anyway. That's the idea from that call. So you want to come away with giving them enough ideas that they are excited, but not giving them everything, and just working out what it is you can get away with in changing the script. And then you go and write a treatment, which I can send you some examples, which is a document, from anything from like 15, 20 to, God knows, 60 pages sometimes, of visuals and text, thousands of words, describing every element of your take on that script, what you want to do with it, and importantly, selling them on your ideas. So making the argument and the case for what's good about what they've got, but what can be done to it to make it even better, and how and why. So it's a marketing job, really. If you just wrote, this is the idea, that's not the best way of getting them on board. You need to sort of strategically plant the seeds in the treatment, so that when they get to reading the script, like later in the treatment, which is exactly what, shot by shot, everything's making sense. They're not going, why are we showing that happen? Like, what? They go, oh, this is the thing he was describing earlier in looser terms. That's the shot he was talking about. Oh, that's cool. So it's got to do that it's got to have a journey in itself, that treatment. And the imagery is really important. It's got to represent what you think it should look like. And then alongside that is the budget, which is, the most important thing really, because, there's no point you giving a treatment in that you can't afford to make, because then you're really going to look stupid when you get given the job and you can't do it. So the producer and you have to work together in, compromising, really, going, well, how can we do that? How can we create that effect? How can we do that? We don't have the money for motion control. We don't have the money for huge set build. We don't have the money for a load of stunt vehicles. Like, how can we do that? Okay, well, we'll just be inside the car for longer and be more, or whatever, and you have to work together to come up with solutions that are creative ones. And that feeds the budget and also back to the treatment, because they might go, listen, Mark, you've got a helicopter shot here. We definitely can't afford a helicopter. You've got to change that. So yeah, and then you finish that, and that goes into the agency, and then you wait to see if you're the favorite or not.
So I think that's great advice, like for people not to be too have a big ego. Like a lot of people will say, I don't do this, or I don't do that, or I want to do it like this. Like just kind of sprinkling the idea in there, like, oh, what about if we change this, or how is this, like being more open, but also like you said, just kind of asking, like figuring out what they're willing to do as well. Because I've made the mistake before of like doing that, where it's like, oh, that won't work, or that won't, and it's kind of, people get like upset that you kind of, so you kind of like, okay, leave that for now, and then maybe I can just talk to the DP on a separate call, or I can talk to the producer when nobody is, like the client's not there, or like trying to just be wary of everybody's like feelings. And like you said, you don't want to upset people straight away or get a bad feeling like on that initial call. And then even when you're on the job, like not saying, no, or like getting angry or upset, just like kind of, using, like being kind and just being aware, like they might have a different idea to you. It might be wrong, but it's different, from you. You got to be like, I'm right, and be confident in your decision, but also like we were talking earlier, like pushing back when it's time to push back, but also kind of they're the boss, they're the client, so they have the say. But also you got to try, like filmmaking's all about compromise, like they say. It's like, how do you get the most of what your ideas out there on the screen, rather than just always, letting them have their way.
Totally. And it's like everybody's got an ego and everyone's got insecurities. And I think if the sooner you recognize that you're in an arena of people that could well be very sensitive, and if you're going to shut someone's idea down publicly, even if you do it in a polite way, then you're in danger of that person being overly sensitive, and that then working against you, because their own insecurities or whatever it is kind of ends up meaning that they don't have as open ears to your next idea. And it's not to say that it's malicious. It's just, I'm just saying, I think we're all human beings and we're all sensitive. And the more you create a place for everybody to be heard, even if when they're speaking, this is the worst idea I've ever heard, I'm never going to do that. But at least they feel listened to. And the way you kind of combat it is not like, no, I'm not doing that. That's a crazy idea. Or why would I, that's never going to bring out the best in the people that are ultimately having to sign off your next shot. Or the people you ultimately want to be on your side when you go to them with an idea, listen, can we talk to the client about this? If you've listened to them all the way, then they're going to listen to you and go, yeah, well, leave it with us. We'll drop the hint and we'll try and get the client on, So I think recognizing that, especially as a director, like egos are everywhere and you need to look after them. And that's even including your own crew, of course, your actors. I mean, the actors are the obvious one, because if you upset if you laugh at your actor in the wrong way, they're going to feel insecure and then their performance is going to go off a cliff. But your own crew as well. You know, they're all responding to you and the atmosphere that you're creating. And if you're having a nice time and enjoying it, and like explaining when you're happy and telling them like that was great, then they're all going to feel happy and like they're doing a good job, and therefore that just ripples out and creates a better atmosphere for everybody. It's so easy, and I've seen this, it's so easy to burst that balloon. One false statement or wrong move, and you know, you say the wrong thing, and or you lose your cool, and it really quickly like just like filters into the rest of the team. So yeah, it's important from the creative agency side of you just to keep them feeling listened to, and it's important for your crew so that they're all happy and on top, you know, and also ultimately giving their best, you know.
Yeah, like I saw like an interview of James Cameron, and that's one of the things he was like disappointed in, is being mean to people and early on in his career, and like maybe just like being too harsh. And then it's not until he went on set with like Ron Howard and he saw how Ron Howard did it. He was so kind and generous and listened. And then he was like, oh, gee, I've been doing it wrong this whole time. But, you know, you learn over time, and the earlier you can learn these lessons, then like I think it's important. And I think it's very kind of you and generous to give your time and educate these young filmmakers, and just like even the ones that have been doing it for a long time, like to be kind and to be generous and not to have a big ego is like one of the most important things.
It is. I think you really see the benefits of that immediately, because crew are often, you know, they're working with different directors every week, right? Because they're busy crew and they're working most days, so they see way more directors and behavior than you do as a director. And when you're nice and you're really trying to foster this lovely atmosphere, more often than not, they will comment on it, and they'll all be like, that was a really great shoot, thank you. And you realize like, oh, okay, so not everybody is doing that, you know, not that they wouldn't say thank you, but you just know. And I just think that you're going to get a better result in a selfish way. You're going to get a better result by being nice, and in a just happiness way for yourself. If you go away knowing for a fact that everyone had a nice time, can't help but make you feel better about everything. I remember one time I lost my cool on a job. Something wasn't working or whatever, and I got annoyed, and I was just like venting. I wasn't swearing like crazy or anything, but I was venting, and my DP just turned to me and went, Marky, no one died. Like, you know, like, and it just sort of like immediately like grounded me back. I was like, oh, yeah, what my, like, of course, like, you know, it's just, moaning about it isn't going to change anything. So all it's going to do is make other people go, oh shit, Mark's in a really like bad mood, I better stay, you know. And you need people around you like that sometimes to just, because it's a lot of pressure and you can easily lose your cool. It's not, you don't even need to be a dick. You can just be having a bad moment and a bad day and let yourself down. But you need people around you that will do that for you. And VPs for directors are aside from producers, you know, they're the people you can choose them. So you, for the most part, get to select the DP. So why would you choose someone that you know is an arrogant person or a grumpy person, or, you know, and they might be amazing, but you're really taking that on. You're going, you've got someone amazing, but they're really grumpy. So people are going to be feeling that. And that's a choice you can make and avoid that if you want. And I certainly am one of those people. I just want nice people everywhere. I want good, talented people, but nice and warm, smiley people is like, because it transforms the set and everyone benefits. So yeah, don't underestimate that.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for talking with us, Mark. And is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Any closing thoughts?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. I would, you know, I would say, I think this really, what you're doing is really great. I mean, when I started out, there was nothing really like this. And I think it's, you know, the older I get and the more I want to like do what I can to sort of spread the knowledge and share, like just be of some small help if I can, because, you know, I know how important it is, the people that you meet in the earlier in your career when they do make a change and they make you think, you know, it could be a little thing, but those people stay in your head. And I think it's great that you're doing this, and you know, if people want to reach out with further questions, and like I always try my best to like reply to stuff, you know, because it's just important. And I have questions for people on, you know, I want to know things sometimes, and you know, want to ask people. So it's kind of a nice two-way street in a way.
Yeah, because I think it's like, it's rare that you get to kind of see the inside of, like, especially commercial directors or producers, because not all, but some of them feel like it's their job security to have these secrets, to just be like, I'm not telling anyone anything. This is all, like, I've spent 20 years in this industry. I'm not going to tell anything. But there's plenty of work for everyone, and I don't think it should be like a secret. You know, you should be sharing, and like everyone has a different experience. It's not like they can take your like career and say, I'm going to do exactly what Mark did, because everyone's different, you know. So it's just like those little insights of being kind, and you know, how the pitching process works, and as long as they know a little bit like of like what steps to do along the way, like you're not telling them all like every little thing to do, but you just like, it's more like film school, but it's in the real world. So, you know, in film school you'll learn like the theory, but you don't know exactly what steps there are involved. So I think this is just like another way to kind of like fill your brain with some stories and ideas, and see how other people have done it, so that you can take those stories and do it yourself.
Exactly. Taking those ideas or techniques or whatever, and trying to use them in your own way. And I think that's the fun thing, and that's what I like to see is, you know, there's nothing worse than seeing a commercial and you're like, you can tell it's a blatant copy of another commercial, whether it's one of yours or someone else's, but you know, they've used the same music. They've basically just gone, I want one of them. And it's often the clients asking that. But, you know, I think directors have got a responsibility to try to reinvent and you know, do something new with the things that other people have done. And that's what keeps everybody excited and keeps pushing at all of us, you know. And yeah, I think that's the fun bit. It's like, how can I use that in a new way? So that would be, yeah, I'll look forward to seeing work that really surprises you, and you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, you know.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for joining us, and hopefully we can do this again in a couple of years' time, or
yeah,
catch up again. But next time you're in America, hopefully we can catch up too.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, thanks a lot.
No worries. Thanks, Mark.
See ya. Bye.
See ya.